You think you understand consequence. You believe a uniform embroidered with wings grants you the authority of a god in a climate-controlled sky. Carol Vance certainly did. She gazed upon a 20-year-old woman swallowed by a simple navy blue university sweatshirt and saw only an obstacle, a piece of grit in the well-oiled machinery of her exclusive world. She didn't just question her presence in the priority boarding lane, she staged a public execution of her dignity. With a theatrical flourish born of 2 decades of petty tyranny, she tore the young woman's first-class ticket to pieces. The confetti of her judgment fluttering onto the polished floor of Denver International Airport. Carol believed she was upholding standards, pruning an overgrown weed from her manicured garden. She had no idea she had just ignited a firestorm that would consume the very foundations of her life, a life built in the service of the man whose daughter she had just tried to erase. This is not merely a tale of a gate agent on a power trip. This is the story of a career in its final screaming descent, and the devastating, beautiful wreckage it leaves behind. You might want to fasten your seatbelt. The air in Concourse B of Denver International Airport was a thin, recycled blend of anxiety, Cinnabon, and the faint kerosene-tinged promise of elsewhere. It was the tail end of the spring rush, a chaotic ballet of rolling suitcases with squeaky wheels, the tinny chime of boarding announcements, and the low hum of thousands of conversations all happening at once. For the weary travelers, it was a necessary evil. For Amara Sterling, it was just a corridor between one part of her life and the next. Amara tugged the worn sleeve of her Georgetown Aeronautics sweatshirt further down her hand, the soft fleece a familiar comfort. She wasn't hiding, she was conserving energy, a lesson learned from countless red-eyes and early morning lectures. At 20, she possessed the focused, slightly tired eyes of someone who spent more time with thrust-to-weight ratio calculations than with campus parties. In her left hand, she gripped her passport and a single stiff sheet of cardstock, her boarding pass for Ether Airlines Flight 710 to Seattle. She navigated the river of humanity flowing toward the economy boarding zones, a sprawling, restless delta of families and backpackers, and aimed for the serene, roped-off tributary of the Ether 1 priority lane. The lane was an oasis of calm, marked by a plush navy carpet and a sleek, brushed steel podium. Behind that podium stood its gatekeeper, Carol Vance. Carol was a woman who wore her Ether Airlines uniform as if it were a suit of armor. Her silk scarf was knotted with a precision that bordered on aggressive, a perfect blood-red triangle at her throat. Her blonde hair was sculpted into an immovable helmet of hairspray, a style that had likely defied both jet wash and changing fashions for the better part of 2 decades. A small gold-plated pin above her name tag proudly declared 25 years of service. She was hammering away at her keyboard as Amara approached, her focus so absolute that she didn't look up until Amara stood directly in front of the podium, a quiet shadow on her navy carpet. "Excuse me," Amara said, her voice soft but clear, not wanting to startle the woman. Carol's typing ceased. The silence was abrupt. She didn't lift her head right away. Instead, she executed a slow, deliberate visual assessment. A condescending appraisal that began at Amara's worn-in running shoes, crept up her simple black leggings, paused with visible disdain on the university crest emblazoned on her sweatshirt, and finally, reluctantly, came to rest on her face. Carol's eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, like the sky at 40,000 feet, and just as cold. "The general boarding line," Carol stated, her voice a clipped, nasal monotone, "is over there." She gestured vaguely with a pen toward the teeming masses without bothering to make eye contact. "They'll call boarding for zones 3 and 4 shortly." "I'm not in general boarding," Amara replied, taking a step forward onto the carpet. "I'm in first." A sound escaped Carol's lips, a short, sharp exhalation that was not quite a laugh but was entirely dismissive. It was the sound of a switch being flipped. She finally met Amara's gaze, her lips tightening into a bloodless line of irritation. "Honey," Carol said, the endearment a weapon coated in saccharin poison. "This is Ether 1. Our first-class cabins have a wait list longer than your arm. Please, don't waste my time. I have Platinum Elite members waiting." The lane was, in fact, completely empty. "I am a Platinum Elite member," Amara stated, her voice remaining level. Her father had taught her the first rule of negotiation: The person who raises their voice has already lost. If you just scan my pass, you'll see. She held out the boarding pass. Carol didn't take it. She leaned forward over the podium, her perfume, a heavy, cloying lily scent reminiscent of a funeral home, invading Amara's personal space. "I don't need to scan anything to know you're playing games," she hissed, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "We see your type all the time." Trying to use the priority lane to skip the queue, hoping we're too busy to notice. It's pathetic, and frankly, looking at you, it's not surprising. A slow, familiar burn started in Amara's chest, the hot flush of injustice. She took a quiet, steadying breath. "Looking at me? You look like you're going to a protest, not a transcontinental flight in a premium cabin," Carol scoffed, her eyes raking over Amara's sweatshirt again. "Now, I suggest you get to the back of the correct line before I have to call airport security and have you removed for causing a disturbance." "The only disturbance here is your refusal to do your job," Amara said, her grip on her passport tightening. "I am trying to board my flight, Ether 710 to Seattle, Seat 2A. Carol froze. Seat 2A. On the new Dreamliner configuration, the first-class cabin had only 6 seats. 1A and 1B were the flagship Sky Suites. 2A was a standard first-class seat, but on this particular flight, it was part of a block reservation. The system showed it was reserved under the CEO's private account. It was supposed to be empty, a courtesy hold. "Seat 2A, Carol repeated, her eyes narrowing into suspicious slits. "Now I know you're lying. That seat is under a corporate block. Show me that ticket." She didn't wait for Amara to hand it over. She snatched it from her grasp with a sudden violent motion that caused a man in a nearby gate area to glance up from his laptop. Carol's eyes darted across the paper, ignoring the barcode and focusing on the printed text. She saw the name, Sterling A. She saw the status, PLT-ELT, CEO Conf. But Carol Vance, a woman who had built her reality on a foundation of rigid prejudice, did not see facts. She saw what she wanted to see, a forgery, a scam, an affront to her authority. "Where did you steal this?" Carol demanded, her voice rising now, drawing the attention of more nearby travelers. "Did you find a discarded printout? This is fraudulent. The system shows this seat is blocked." "It's not fraudulent," Amara said, her calmness seeming only to enrage the woman further. "The reservation was made this morning. Just check your computer, scan the code." "I don't need a computer to spot a fraud." Carol's voice was now a full-blown shout. "You think you can just waltz in here, dressed like you just rolled out of a dorm room, and claim one of the most exclusive seats on this airline? Who in the world do you think you are?" The audience was growing. Phones were starting to emerge from pockets. The man who had looked up earlier, a portly businessman in an expensive but ill-fitting suit, ambled closer, a look of self-important concern on his face. "Is there a problem here, miss?" he asked Carol, completely ignoring Amara. "Yes, there is," Carol snapped, turning to the man with a sudden, jarringly sweet smile. "Just a small security matter, sir. A young woman attempting to board with a fraudulent document. I'm handling it." She turned back to Amara, the smile evaporating like a mirage. "I am giving you one last chance to walk away," Carol said through gritted teeth. "Turn around, leave this concourse, and I won't press charges." "I'm not leaving," Amara said, her voice unwavering. "I have a conference to get to." Carol's face flushed a deep mottled crimson. She was a petty queen in a small kingdom, and she was not accustomed to her authority being challenged. She was used to compliance, to nervous apologies, to fear. "Fine," she spat. "You want to play this game? Let's play." The ambient hum of the airport seemed to recede, creating a pocket of supercharged silence around the podium. Carol held up the boarding pass, the heavy, expensive cardstock, a symbol of the world she believed Amara was trying to infiltrate. She held it inches from Amara's face. "This," Carol seethed, her voice trembling with rage, "is garbage." And then she ripped it. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet tension, a sharp, tearing sound that cut through the air. She tore it once, cleanly, down the middle. Then, with a furious grunt, she laid the two halves together and tore them again, and then a third time. She opened her hand and let the small, confetti-like squares of paper flutter down to the pristine navy carpet at Amara's feet. There, Carol said, brushing her hands together as if she had just disposed of something unclean. Now you have no ticket, which means you are officially loitering. Security. She waved her arm frantically at two TSA officers who were chatting near a security checkpoint about 60 feet away. Amara stood perfectly still. She looked down at the pieces of paper scattered across the floor. Her name, Sterling, was bisected, lying in ruin on the nylon fibers. A stunned silence had fallen over the immediate area. The businessman looked shocked, his mouth slightly agape. A woman in the adjacent boarding line covered her child's eyes. A pair of college students had their phones held high, their lenses capturing every second of Carol's smug, triumphant expression. Slowly, deliberately, Amara lifted her head. For the first time, the mask of calm composure slipped, just a fraction. Her dark eyes, usually so thoughtful, now burned with a cold, focused fire. "You should not have done that," Amara said. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet in the charged silence, it carried with the weight of a judge's gavel. "I do my job," Carol sneered, crossing her arms over her chest. "I protect this airline's integrity. We don't need people like you cheapening the Ether One brand." "People like me?" Amara repeated, the question hanging in the air. "Scammers," Carol said quickly, though the unspoken implication was thick and suffocating. "Now get out of my lane. The officers are coming." The two TSA agents, looking more bored than concerned, began to walk over. "What's the problem, Carol?" one of them asked, his tone suggesting this was not the first time he'd been summoned by her. Everyone who worked Concourse B knew Carol Vance. "This individual refused to leave the priority lane," Carol announced, her voice instantly shifting into a tone of beleaguered victimhood. "She presented what I identified as a fraudulent boarding pass, became belligerent when I confronted her, and is now trespassing. I feel threatened." The agent turned his weary gaze to Amara. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the podium." "I'm a passenger on this flight," Amara said, her voice steady again. "That woman just destroyed my boarding pass." The officer glanced at the floor. He saw the confetti of paper. He looked back at Carol, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "You ripped up her ticket?" "It was a fraudulent document," Carol insisted, her voice becoming shrill. "Standard procedure is to confiscate and destroy fraudulent materials to prevent their misuse." "It wasn't fraudulent," Amara said. She reached into the front pocket of her sweatshirt. "She's reaching for something," Carol shrieked, taking a dramatic step backward. "She might have a weapon." The officer's hands instinctively moved toward their belts. "Hands, show me your hands now." Amara froze, then moved with deliberate slowness, pulling out not a weapon, but a slim, dark blue smartphone. "I'm calling the person who issued the ticket," she said, her thumb swiping across the screen. "Oh, go right ahead," Carol laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Call your little boyfriend. Tell him your scam didn't work. Tell him the mean old gate agent was too smart for you." Amara ignored her. She tapped a single contact saved as a favorite. The name on the screen was simple: Dad. She pressed the phone to her ear. It rang once. "Amara, everything okay? Captain Miller just texted me, said you hadn't checked in yet." The voice on the other end was deep and resonant, the sound quality perfect. "Hey, Dad," Amara said, her eyes locked on Carol's triumphant face. "I'm at the gate, but we have a problem. The agent here, a Ms. Carol Vance." Carol's smirk wavered slightly at the sound of her own name spoken with such clarity. "She refused to let me board," Amara continued. "She said my ticket was a fake because of how I'm dressed. And then she tore it up, in front of everyone." A profound silence descended on the other end of the line. It was not an empty silence. It was the heavy, pressurized quiet that precedes a hurricane making landfall. "She did what?" The voice was no longer warm and paternal. It was glacial. It was the voice that had brokered billion-dollar deals with Boeing and faced down the pilots' union during a strike. "She ripped it up, Dad. She called security on me. She said I was cheapening the brand." "Put her on the phone," the voice commanded. Not a request, an order. Amara lowered the phone and held it out toward Carol. "He wants to speak with you." Carol rolled her eyes with theatrical exasperation. She strode forward, radiating an aura of absolute authority, certain that some irate father was about to get a lesson in airline policy he would never forget. Listen here, Carol snapped into the phone, holding it away from her head as if it were contaminated. Your daughter is creating a public nuisance. She has no valid ticket for this flight. If you don't instruct her to leave the premises immediately, she will be taken into police custody. Look at the name on the ticket you destroyed. The voice boomed from the speaker, loud enough for the TSA agents to hear clearly. Carol glanced down at the shredded paper. She could make out the letters Sterl. I don't care what name she made up, Carol shouted back. I care about policy. My name, the voice thundered, each word a hammer blow, is Robert Sterling. I am the founder and CEO of Ether Airlines. I own the uniform on your back, the podium you are standing behind, and the 787 Dreamliner you are currently preventing my daughter from boarding. Carol Vance went utterly, completely still. The blood drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty grey mask of shock. Robert Sterling, the man whose portrait hung in the lobby of their corporate headquarters, the man whose signature was on the first page of the employee handbook she prided herself on knowing by heart. She stammered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. Mr. Sterling, you tore up my daughter's ticket, Robert said, his voice now terrifyingly calm. Put my daughter back on the phone, now. Carol's hand trembled so violently she almost dropped the phone as she handed it back to Amara. The air around her felt thin, unbreathable. The TSA agents were now looking at her with a mixture of pity and alarm. The pompous businessman had quietly melted back into the crowd. Amara put the phone back to her ear. Yeah, Dad. Get on the plane, sweetie. Captain Miller is waiting for you. Ms. Vance will reprint your pass. If she says one more word to you, one single syllable, she won't just be fired. I will personally see to it that she is legally barred from ever working in a customer-facing role in this country again. Okay, Dad, see you this weekend. She hung up. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a firing squad taking aim. I need to reprint your boarding pass, Carol whispered, her voice a dry, rattling thing. She could barely form the words. Don't worry about it, Amara said, her voice cool and level. She stepped over the pathetic scraps of paper on the floor. I'll use the app. She walked past the podium, past the frozen, horrified statue of Carol Vance, and headed down the jet bridge. But denial is a potent, hallucinogenic drug. As Amara disappeared from view, Carol's shock curdled into a frantic, desperate rage. It couldn't be true. It was a bluff, a sophisticated prank. Robert Sterling was an old-money philanthropist from Boston. He didn't have a daughter who looked like that. Carol Vance had a choice: accept the catastrophic reality of her mistake or double down on the prejudice that had led her there. She chose the latter. She snatched the radio from her belt. Ether 710, this is Gate B42, she said, her voice high and strained. We have a potential security breach. An unauthorized individual has bypassed gate security and is on the jet bridge, requesting captain's permission to intercept. She was going to prove she was right, even if it meant tearing the whole world down around her. The jet bridge was a sterile, silent tunnel, a liminal space between the chaos of the terminal and the ordered calm of the aircraft. Amara walked with a steady, unhurried pace, the soft soles of her shoes making no sound on the industrial carpet. Inside, her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but her face was a placid lake. She had spent her life under the shadow of her father's empire, learning early that composure was a shield more effective than any bodyguard. She reached the open door of the aircraft. The air that flowed out smelled of new leather, filtered oxygen, and the faint, pleasant aroma of brewing coffee. Standing at the threshold was the flight's purser, a kind-faced woman in her 50s named Susan. Welcome aboard, Susan began, her practiced smile faltering for a microsecond as her eyes took in Amara's casual attire. But Susan was a consummate professional, a veteran of the skies. Unlike Carol, her training had stuck. She recovered instantly. May I see your boarding pass, miss? I'm sorry, Amara said, her voice even. The gate agent destroyed it. I'm in seat 2A. My name is Amara Sterling. Susan's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose toward her hairline. Sterling. She glanced down at the tablet in her hand, scrolling to the passenger manifest. There it was. Sterling, A. The name was highlighted in a soft gold, a designation she had only seen a handful of times in her career. It meant Protocol Aureus. Do not question, do not disturb. Offer anything, anticipate everything. Oh, Miss Sterling, Susan breathed, her entire demeanor shifting from professional warmth to something approaching genuine reverence. My deepest apologies. We weren't aware. VIP services usually gives us a heads up. It was a very last-minute trip, Amara explained, and the gate agent, Carol, seemed to have some difficulty processing it. Susan's friendly expression tightened at the mention of the name. It was a look that spoke volumes, a silent acknowledgement of a shared and difficult colleague. I am so very sorry for any trouble at the gate, Miss Sterling, Susan said, gesturing gracefully into the cabin. Please, allow me to show you to your seat. May I get you a pre-departure glass of champagne? Or perhaps some tea? Just some water would be lovely, thank you, Amara said. She stepped into the first-class cabin. It was a world of hushed tones and understated luxury. Polished wood grain, brushed metal accents, and seats that looked more like futuristic thrones than airline furniture. The lighting was a soft, warm gold, designed to soothe the nerves of the powerful and the privileged. She found seat 2A, a spacious pod with its own privacy screen and a small vase containing a single perfect white orchid. She slid her backpack into the overhead compartment and sank into the plush leather seat, the material cool against her skin. She closed her eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She thought the ordeal was over. She thought she had reached sanctuary. She was profoundly mistaken. A sudden commotion erupted from the front of the aircraft. Heavy, angry footsteps thudded on the floor of the jet bridge, and a voice, shrill with fury, sliced through the cabin's tranquility. Where is she? I know she's on here. Amara's eyes snapped open. Carol Vance was storming down the aisle. She had abandoned her post, a cardinal sin for a gate agent. Her face was a mask of blotchy red fury, her hairspray helmet now slightly askew. She looked utterly unhinged. Susan immediately moved to intercept her, placing herself in the aisle like a gentle but firm wall. Carol, what on earth are you doing? You can't be on the aircraft. We're finalizing for pushback. Get out of my way, Susan, Carol snarled, trying to shoulder past the purser. There is a stowaway on this plane, a security risk. What are you talking about? Susan hissed, keeping her voice low, acutely aware of the other first-class passengers who were now staring. Miss Sterling is in her seat. Miss Sterling? Carol let out a wild, manic laugh that made the other passengers flinch. Is that the name she gave you? That girl is a con artist. She's a street kid who forged a ticket and threatened me. Every head in the cabin was now turned toward the drama. In seat 1A, a man named Marcus Thorne, a tech mogul known for his ruthless business practices and his even more ruthless opinion of the world, lowered his tablet. He looked from the hysterical Carol to the calm Amara, his lip curling with the innate disdain of the ultra-rich for any form of public disturbance. Is there a problem here? Thorne asked, his voice sharp with entitlement. I paid a small fortune for this seat, and I expect a certain level of decorum, not a scene from a daytime talk show. My sincerest apologies, Mr. Thorne, Carol said, instantly trying to compose herself, smoothing her skirt and adopting a posture of beleaguered authority. This individual forced her way past security. She is a potential threat. I am removing her for the safety of all passengers. Before Susan could react, Carol lunged past her. She marched to seat 2A and stood over Amara, her shadow falling across the small vase with the orchid. Out, Carol commanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the open aircraft door. Get off this plane now before I have the air marshals drag you out. I spoke to my father, Amara said, her voice dangerously quiet. He spoke to you. Did you misunderstand him? I heard a voice on a phone, Carol shrieked, all pretense of control gone. Anyone can use a voice-changing app. You think I'm an idiot. Richard Sterling is a Boston Brahmin. Look at you. You are... She faltered, searching for a word that wouldn't result in an immediate lawsuit, but her eyes screamed the slur she was thinking. You are obviously not his daughter. Carol, that is enough, Susan warned, stepping up behind her. You are going to be reported for this. Check the manifest. The manifest has been hacked, Carol screamed, flecks of spittle flying from her lips. She's a criminal. Look at her clothes. Does this look like Ether One clientele to you? Carol reached out, her hand a claw with sharp red-painted nails, and grabbed Amara's arm. That was the final, irrevocable mistake. Touching a passenger was a fireable offense. Assaulting a VIP was career suicide. Putting your hands on the owner's daughter was akin to pulling the pin on a grenade and swallowing it. Amara recoiled, yanking her arm away. "Do not touch me. I will touch you all. I want to get you off my plane," Carol roared. She grabbed for Amara again, her nails digging into the soft fabric of the sweatshirt, pulling her forward in her seat. "Help me," Carol yelled to the cabin at large. "She's resisting arrest. Someone help me restrain her." The cabin was a tableau of frozen shock, but Marcus Thorne in 1A stood up. In his world, order was paramount. He saw a hysterical airline employee and a young woman in a hoodie, and his lifetime of privilege and prejudice filled in the rest of the story. "That's enough of this nonsense," Thorne grumbled, stepping into the aisle. He was a large man, and he loomed over Amara's seat. "Listen to the employee, girl. You've had your little adventure. Now get off the plane so the rest of us can get to Seattle. You clearly don't belong here." Amara looked from Carol's crazed face to Thorne's arrogant sneer. She was trapped, judged and convicted by a jury of two who saw her only as an interloper. The injustice of it was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. "I am not moving," Amara said, her voice shaking now, not with fear, but with a profound, suppressed rage. "Fine," Carol said, panting. "We do this the hard way." She reached for her radio again, to call for the police, but before her fingers could touch the button, the cockpit door swung open with a decisive click. Captain David Miller was a man who seemed carved from granite and aviation fuel. He had silvering hair at his temples, a jaw that could cut glass, and a commanding presence that could calm a cabin in the worst turbulence. He had flown F-18s for the Navy before joining Ether Airlines 30 years ago. He had seen and done it all. He stepped into the first-class cabin, his captain's hat tucked neatly under his arm, his brow furrowed in a thunderous expression of displeasure. "What in the name of God is this circus?" Captain Miller's voice wasn't a shout, but it resonated with an absolute authority that instantly silenced the cabin. Carol spun around, her face lighting up with manic relief. The cavalry, she thought, had finally arrived. "Captain," she gasped, rushing toward him. "Thank heavens. We have a stowaway, a security breach. This passenger." She pointed a shaking finger at Amara. "She used a fraudulent pass, bypassed my authority, and is refusing to deplane. She's making wild claims about being related to Mr. Sterling." Captain Miller's gaze was like a laser. He looked at the disheveled, frantic Carol. He looked past her, at the pompous Marcus Thorne standing in the aisle. Then his eyes fell upon the young woman in seat 2A. A flicker of something crossed his face. Recognition. Captain Miller had been Robert Sterling's chief pilot on the corporate jet for 5 years before returning to commercial flying for a better work-life balance. He had flown Amara to summer camps and college tours. He remembered a bright, inquisitive 10-year-old girl who had sat in the cockpit jump seat, asking him endless, brilliant questions about Bernoulli's principle. He saw the Georgetown Aeronautics sweatshirt and smiled internally. "Captain," Marcus Thorne interjected, puffing out his chest, "this employee is simply doing her job. This girl is delaying our departure. I demand she be removed at once." Carol nodded vigorously. "Mr. Thorne is right, Captain. She's a liability." Captain Miller slowly, deliberately, turned his icy gaze back to Carol Vance. The look he gave her was not one of support. It was a look of utter, damning contempt. "You are Gate Agent Vance, are you not?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "Yes, Captain. Carol Vance." "And you have been with this airline for 25 years?" "Yes, sir. A perfect record," she said proudly. "Then you, of all people," Captain Miller said, taking a step closer, forcing her to take a step back, "should know who sits in the Sterling family's reserved seats." Carol's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The cold dread that had begun at the gate was now a tidal wave, crashing over her. Captain Miller walked right past her. He gave Marcus Thorne a look so dismissive that the tech mogul physically shrank back and stumbled into his seat. Suddenly finding the contents of his carry-on bag utterly fascinating, the captain stopped directly in front of seat 2A. The entire cabin seemed to be holding its collective breath. Carol watched, her mind screaming for him to grab the girl, to vindicate her. Instead, Captain David Miller, a man who commanded a 200-ton aircraft and the lives of 300 souls, inclined his head in a gesture of profound respect. "Amara," he said, his voice softening into a warm, paternal tone. "It's good to see you. I'm sorry about all this. Your father called me on the sat phone a few minutes ago. He was displeased." The silence in the cabin was now so absolute it was painful. Marcus Thorne looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Carol felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to grip the back of a seat to stay upright. "Father called me. Displeased." The words were a death sentence. "Hi, Captain Miller," Amara said, a small, weary smile touching her lips. "It's been a while." "Too long," the captain said. He straightened up and turned around. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by Arctic frost. He looked at Carol Vance as if she were a particularly disgusting piece of garbage someone had left in his pristine cabin. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice ringing with finality, "in my 30 years of flying, I have never witnessed such a disgraceful, unprofessional, and prejudiced display of incompetence. You are a stain on this uniform." "Captain, I didn't know," she stammered, her body trembling. "Her clothes. I thought she was a threat." "You thought," Captain Miller repeated, his voice dripping with scorn. "You did not think. You judged. You saw a young woman of color in a sweatshirt and you decided she was a criminal. You destroyed airline property, a valid boarding pass. You harassed a Platinum Elite passenger. You assaulted her. And you did all of this in direct defiance of a phone call from the CEO of this company." "Please," Carol whispered, tears of pure terror now streaming down her face, carving paths through her makeup. "It was a mistake. I was trying to protect the flight." "Your job is over, Ms. Vance," the captain said. He reached for the interphone on the bulkhead. He pressed the button for the cockpit. "First officer, this is the captain. Patch me through to ground operations now." There was a brief pause. "This is Captain Miller of Ether 710. I am officially invoking my command authority. Gate Agent Carol Vance at B-42 is to be relieved of duty, effective immediately. Have security meet her on the jet bridge. She is not to set foot in a secure area of this airport again. Acknowledge." Carol let out a choked sob. "No, you can't. I have seniority. I have the union." "You are relieved of duty," Captain Miller repeated, hanging up the phone. "You will get off my aircraft now. You are no longer an employee of Ether Airlines." "This isn't fair," she shrieked, the last vestiges of her composure shattering. "She provoked me. All of you saw it." She looked desperately around the cabin, pleading with the other passengers, but every eye avoided hers. Marcus Thorne was now pretending to be asleep, his face hidden behind an overpriced magazine. "Susan," Captain Miller said to the purser, "please escort Miss Vance from the aircraft. If she refuses, the Port Authority will be happy to assist." Susan nodded grimly and took Carol's elbow. "Let's go, Carol. It's over." "No," Carol screamed, grabbing the back of the seat. "This is my life. I earned this. I earned it." From her seat, Amara watched the complete and utter disintegration of the woman who had tried to humiliate her. She felt no joy, no triumph, only a profound and weary sadness. "Ms. Vance," Amara said, her voice cutting through the woman's hysterics. Carol froze, turning to look at the young woman she had so terribly misjudged. "You said I was garbage," Amara said quietly. "You said I didn't belong here, but look around you. The only person who doesn't belong on this plane right now is you." The simple, unvarnished truth of the statement seemed to hit Carol like a physical blow. Her hands fell away from the seat, her shoulders slumped in utter defeat. Susan gently guided her down the aisle. As she passed the rows of silent, staring passengers, the very people whose approval she had so desperately craved, she was invisible. She was no longer a figure of authority. She was just a problem that had been solved. She stepped off the plane and into the jet bridge, and the heavy cabin door hissed shut behind her, a sound of absolute finality. The cabin remained silent for a long moment. Captain Miller let out a heavy sigh and straightened his tie. He turned to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Ether Airlines, I sincerely apologize for the disturbance and the resulting delay. We will have a replacement crew member on board shortly and will be underway as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience." He gave Amara a small, reassuring nod. "Anything I can get for you, Amara? A flight simulator session when we land?" Amara managed a real smile. "Just a smooth flight, Captain." "You've got it." He disappeared back into the cockpit. The tension in the cabin slowly began to dissipate, but the ordeal was far from over. Carol Vance was gone from the plane, but the venom she had injected into the situation was already spreading. As she was escorted through the terminal by airport security, her mind, twisted by humiliation and rage, wasn't thinking of apologies. It was thinking of revenge. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She was going to tell her story, a story where she was the hero, the victim, the brave frontline worker standing up to a spoiled, dangerous brat. The battle for Flight 710 was over. The war for public opinion was just beginning. Carol Vance sat in the sterile beige-on-beige waiting room of the Airline Employees Union office near the airport, a cup of vending machine coffee growing cold in her trembling hands. The fury had subsided, replaced by the chilling tendrils of panic. But beneath the panic was a hard, bitter kernel of self-righteousness. She had been wronged. In her mind, the events had already been rewritten, edited into a narrative of martyrdom. She wasn't a bully who got her comeuppance. She was a diligent, working-class woman crushed under the heel of dynastic power. She had spent the last 2 hours on the phone, not with a lawyer, but with a freelance journalist named Ethan Sharp, a man who made his living peddling outrage to online news aggregators. Sharp salivated at the story she fed him. "So let me get this straight," Ethan had said, his voice a conspiratorial rasp. "This girl, dressed like she was going to riot, refuses to show proper ID, becomes verbally abusive, and when you, a 25-year veteran, try to enforce federal safety protocols, the captain, who just happens to be her daddy's old crony, has you fired on the spot." "That's exactly what happened," Carol lied, her voice thick with manufactured tears. "I was terrified. I thought she might be a threat to the aircraft. I was just doing my job, protecting my passengers, and for that, I lose my career, my pension, everything. It's corporate corruption, Ethan, the 1% protecting their own." By the time Ether Flight 710 was on its final approach to Seattle, Ethan Sharp's article was live, syndicated across a dozen right-leaning websites. The headline was explosive. "Veteran Ether Flight Attendant Fired, Assaulted by Woke CEO's Daughter After Enforcing Security Rules." The article was a masterclass in omission and fabrication. It conveniently forgot to mention the torn ticket. It painted Amara as an aggressive, entitled social justice warrior who used her father's name like a weapon. It included a carefully selected smiling photo of Carol from her employee file, juxtaposed with a grainy zoomed-in shot of Amara from a public social media profile where she was at a protest, making her look angry and radical. When Amara switched her phone off airplane mode upon landing, it vibrated so violently in her hand she nearly dropped it. A tidal wave of notifications crashed over her screen. Thousands of tags, mentions and friend requests. And then the messages. Vicious, hateful DMs filled with racial slurs and threats. The comments on the articles were a cesspool of rage. "Patriot Flyer 76. Disgusting. These rich brats think the world belongs to them." "Justice for Carol." "Mama Bear USA, I'm cancelling my Ether card. I stand with the working people, not corporate princesses." "Truth Seeker 99. Fire Captain Miller. He chose a spoiled kid over the safety of 300 passengers." Amara stood in the jet bridge at SeaTac, the world spinning around her. The curious, pitying glances from her fellow passengers suddenly made sense. They hadn't just witnessed a disturbance, they had been given a narrative. And in that narrative, she was the villain. Back in Denver, in the soaring glass tower of Ether Airlines headquarters, the crisis was escalating. Robert Sterling stood in the center of the communications department's war room, a circular office where dozens of monitors displayed real-time social media trends, news feeds, and the plummeting Ether stock price. The dominant color on every screen was a virulent, angry red. "They're slaughtering us, Robert," said Marcus Thorne, the VP of Public Relations. coincidentally the brother of the arrogant passenger from seat 1A. This Justice for Carol hashtag is trending #1 in the US. The story fits a narrative people want to believe: working-class hero versus the entitled elite. We have to get ahead of this. We need to issue a statement, offer Carol a generous severance package with a rock-solid NDA, and make this go away. Robert Sterling turned his head slowly, his eyes, so much like his daughter's, dark with a controlled rage. "A severance package," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You want me to reward the woman who publicly humiliated my daughter? The woman who assaulted her and then lied to the world about it?" "It's not about what's right, it's about what's smart," Thorne argued, shifting his weight nervously. "It's damage control. A few million to shut her up is a hell of a lot cheaper than losing $1 billion in market cap. It's the cost of doing business." "No," Robert said, his voice like chipping ice. He walked to the vast window overlooking the Rocky Mountains. "This stopped being business the moment she laid a hand on my daughter. This is about truth. Get me the head of security. Now." A few minutes later, a stern-looking woman in a sharp suit entered the room. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Sterling?" "Brenda, the incident at Gate B42 this morning. I assume the area is under full CCTV coverage?" "Of course, sir. 4 different angles. High definition with audio." "I want that footage," Robert commanded. "Every angle, every second, from the moment my daughter approached the podium until the moment Carol Vance was escorted away." "There's a process, sir," the PR head interjected. "We have to file a request with the airport authority." "Brenda," Robert said, ignoring Thorne and looking directly at his head of security, "get me the damn footage. I don't care if you have to call the mayor or the governor. I want it on my desk in 1 hour." While the corporate machinery began to grind, the internet, as it often does, produced its own form of justice. At a coffee shop near the University of Denver, a graduate student named Liam was procrastinating on his thesis. He'd been at the airport that morning, flying home for the weekend. He'd seen the whole thing. Now, seeing the Justice for Carol hashtag, he felt a surge of indignation. "This is insane," he muttered. He hadn't filmed it, but he had been close enough to hear everything. He opened his laptop and started typing. He posted a long, detailed thread on Twitter. "Thread, I was at DIA Gate B42 this morning, and the story you're reading about Trasham Carol Vance is a complete lie." 1:15 CM. He recounted the entire event with meticulous detail. Amara's calm demeanor, Carol's escalating aggression, the polite requests to scan the ticket, the shocking moment Carol snatched and ripped the pass, and her shrieking for security. He didn't know who Amara was, only that she had been the victim, not the aggressor. Liam's thread was a single drop of truth in an ocean of outrage, but it began to spread. It was retweeted by a few people, then a few hundred, then thousands. Journalists started to see it. It cast the first shadow of doubt on Carol's story. An hour later, Brenda walked back into the war room and plugged a secure hard drive into the main monitor. "Here you go, sir. Angle 3 has the clearest audio." Robert Sterling, his PR team, and his legal counsel stood in silence and watched. The video was brutally clear. There was no ambiguity. It showed Carol's sneering condescension, Amara's patient restraint, and the violent, unprovoked act of tearing the ticket. It captured Carol's lies to the TSA and her frantic, self-serving call for security. When the video ended, the room was silent. Marcus Thorne looked pale. "Okay," he whispered. "This is much worse than I thought." "Release it," Robert Sterling said. "Sir?" "Hold a press conference. Right now. Put this footage on a loop on the screen behind the podium. Issue a formal statement. Ether Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, harassment, and abuse of authority. Announce that Ms. Vance has been terminated for cause and that we are pursuing all available legal options against her for defamation and for filing a false report with federal officers." He paused, his eyes hard as diamonds. "And get my daughter on the phone. I want her to be the one to press the button that sends this video to the world." In her hotel room in Seattle, Amara, shaken but resolute, gave her consent. At 5 p.m. Mountain Time, Ether Airlines' official social media channels released the unedited 4-minute video with a simple caption: "The truth about Flight 710. We stand with our passengers against all forms of abuse. Ether stands for respect." The internet's reversal was instantaneous and brutal. It was like watching a hurricane change direction. The Daj and Justice for Carol hashtag was overrun, hijacked by the video clip. The outrage that had been directed at Amara now turned on Carol with 1,000 times the fury. The hero became the villain, the victim became the liar. Airline Karen began to trend worldwide. In her union rep's office, Carol Vance was preparing for a primetime interview on a major news network, ready to cement her status as a working-class folk hero. Her phone buzzed. It was Ethan Sharp, the journalist. "Carol," he said, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth, "have you seen Twitter?" "No, I'm prepping for my big interview. We're winning, Ethan." "We're not winning anything," Ethan snapped. "They released the security footage, Carol, the whole thing, with audio. You lied to me. You lied about everything." Carol's heart stopped. "What? What video?" "Don't play dumb with me. You tore the ticket. You were the aggressor. You look like a monster. My publication just issued a full retraction of my article. My career is on the line because of you." The line went dead. Carol's hands shook as she fumbled with her phone, her fingers suddenly clumsy. She found the video. She watched herself, a distorted, hateful version of the woman she thought she was, perpetrating the very acts she had denied. Her public execution was now playing on a loop for millions of people. A new notification popped up on her screen. It was an email from the Ether Airlines legal department. Subject: Notice of termination for cause and pending civil and criminal litigation. 3 days later, the main conference room on the top floor of the Ether Tower felt as cold and pressurized as a high-altitude cabin. Carol Vance sat on one side of a vast, gleaming mahogany table. The beige power suit she had bought for her television interview now seemed to mock her. She looked haggard, a decade older than she had just a few days prior. Beside her sat her union representative, a weary-looking man who already seemed defeated. Across the table sat a formidable trio. In the center, Robert Sterling, his expression unreadable, exuding an aura of immense patient power. To his right, the company's chief legal counsel, a woman renowned for her take-no-prisoners approach. And to his left, Amara. She was dressed simply in a grey blazer and dark jeans. She wasn't looking at Carol. She was looking out the window at the endless blue sky. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Robert began, his voice calm. "You are here because, despite your egregious behavior, the union contract requires this exit meeting." The union rep cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling, my client, Ms. Vance, was under extreme stress. She made a regrettable error in judgment, but her 25 years of loyal service, the chief counsel interjected, sliding a thick binder across the table. "This binder contains the complete, unredacted complaint file for Ms. Vance. 17 formal complaints filed by passengers over the last 10 years alone. 9 for verbal abuse, 5 citing discriminatory language, and 3 for inappropriate escalation. It seems your loyal service has been a 25-year reign of terror that your immediate supervisor, who was terminated yesterday, saw fit to cover up." Carol stared at the binder as if it were a snake. Those were misunderstandings. They were difficult passengers. "And was my daughter a difficult passenger?" Robert asked, leaning forward slightly. "The video evidence, which has been handed over to the district attorney's office, shows you committing battery, destruction of property, and knowingly filing a false report to federal law enforcement officers. The TSA does not take that last one lightly, Ms. Vance. It carries a potential prison sentence." Carol gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Prison?" "That is the situation," Robert continued smoothly. "So here is our offer. It is not a negotiation. You will sign this document, which is a full and public retraction of every lie you told the media. You will issue a formal apology to my daughter. You will forfeit the entirety of your pension and 401k to Ether Airlines to begin to cover the damages your defamatory statements caused to our brand and our shareholders. In return, the company will not pursue a civil suit against you, and my daughter will inform the DA that she does not wish to press criminal charges." "My pension," Carol whispered, the words catching in her throat. That's everything. I worked my whole life for that." "You worked your whole life to build a pedestal for yourself from which you could look down on people. Robert said, his voice turning to steel. You tried to ruin my daughter's reputation. You brought this on yourself. Please, Carol begged, turning her tear-filled eyes to Amara for the first time. Please, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. Don't take my whole life away. Amara finally turned her gaze from the window and met Carol's eyes. Her expression was not hateful or triumphant. It was clear and steady. A mistake, Amara said, her voice quiet but filling the room, is when you pour coffee instead of tea. A mistake is forgetting to put the armrest down. What you did was not a mistake. It was a choice. You made a series of choices. You chose to judge me based on my clothes and the color of my skin. You chose to escalate the situation instead of simply scanning my ticket. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to lie to the world to save yourself. Those aren't mistakes, Ms. Vance. That is your character. Amara stood up. You tore up my boarding pass because you thought you had power, she said. But power isn't a uniform or a title. Power is how you treat people when you think no one is watching, and the whole world was watching. The fight drained out of Carol's body, leaving an empty, defeated husk. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly that her signature was a barely legible scrawl. With that stroke, her career was erased. Her financial future was annihilated. Her name was now a synonym for bigotry. Robert Sterling stood. Our business is concluded. A security guard will escort you from the building. Carol stood on wobbly legs and walked toward the door. As she left, she glanced back and saw Robert put a comforting arm around his daughter's shoulders. They were a unit, a fortress she had foolishly tried to attack with a handful of pebbles. She rode the elevator down 50 floors in a silent daze. When the doors opened into the magnificent marble lobby, she stepped out into the bright Denver sunlight. She had no job, no savings, and a reputation that would follow her for the rest of her life. She stood on the curb, blinking in the unfamiliar glare of a future she had never imagined. She had tried to ground Amara Sterling, and in the end, she was the only one who had crashed. 6 months later, the crisp autumn air of Denver had given way to the biting cold of deep winter. In a bustling, fluorescent-lit diner 20 miles outside the city, a woman refilled a salt shaker, her movements slow and automatic. Her blonde hair, no longer a lacquered helmet, was pulled back in a simple, frizzy ponytail, revealing streaks of grey at the roots. Her uniform was a cheap polyester dress in a faded shade of pink. Her name tag, pinned crookedly, read Carol. "Hey, Carol," the manager yelled from behind the counter. "Bus table 7 on the double. We got a line at the door." "On it," she muttered, her voice hoarse. Her feet throbbed in her sensible, non-slip shoes. Her back ached from hours of standing. The tips of her fingers were raw from the harsh dishwater. This was her life now, minimum wage, a tiny apartment that always smelled of her neighbor's cooking, and the constant gnawing humiliation of her fall from grace. As she cleared away dirty plates, she glanced up at the small television mounted above the counter. A local news channel was on. And in business news, the anchor said brightly, Denver-based Ether Airlines today announced the launch of a groundbreaking new initiative. Carol froze, a half-eaten pancake poised on a fork in her hand. On the screen, at a press conference in a gleaming aircraft hangar, stood Amara Sterling. She wasn't in a hoodie. She was in a sharp, tailored business suit, looking poised, confident, and powerful. She was speaking at a podium, her father standing just behind her, beaming with pride. The Ascend Initiative, Amara's voice rang out, clear and strong, is Ether's new commitment to changing the face of aviation. We are funding a full-ride scholarship and mentorship program for young people from underrepresented communities who dream of becoming pilots, engineers, and airline executives. It is our belief that the people who serve the world in the skies should reflect the world on the ground. We are dedicated to ensuring that no one is ever made to feel that they don't belong. The camera showed a line of bright-faced, diverse teenagers standing behind Amara, the first class of Ascend Scholarship recipients. Captain Miller was there, shaking one of the young men's hands. A sharp, physical pain lanced through Carol's chest. That was her world, the hangars, the uniforms, the promise of travel. A world she had thrown away. "Hey, lady, you gonna clear this table or what?" A man at the next table grumbled. "Some of us have places to be." Carol snapped back to the greasy reality of the diner. "Sorry," she whispered. She stacked the plates, the weight of them heavy in her hands. She scraped the leftover food into a bin, the smell of cold eggs and syrup turning her stomach. She looked at her reflection in the polished steel of the kitchen door, a tired, defeated woman in a pink dress. She had tried to make one young woman feel small and invisible. Instead, she had succeeded only in erasing herself.